This is our event for our GC2Y classes. Dr. S, our group assignment is under reproductive health and justice. So we decided to do a group panel on the Dobbs decision in Georgia College. My name is Lauren, and everybody sitting in this front row is our group leaders. If y'all introduce yourselves.
I'm Peyton. I'm Tammy. I'm Landry. I'm Lacey. And we just wanted to do a little disclaimer that the thoughts and ideas of our parents don't reflect Georgia College.
And right up here is our panelist. And one of our panelists is introduce yourselves and your role here.
Jen, you here?
I am here.
You go first, introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Johanna Drabagi, and I work in business law and ethics here at Georgia College. I have 4 children, and that is the reason that I am not with you. They have so many events, and I look forward to participating with you this evening. And another big thing that I do on campus is coordinating Constitution Week.
I'm Nicholas Creel, Assistant Professor of Business Law, Director of the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So again, with Jan, teach business law. One of my main areas of focus is constitutional law, and I've written a good bit about abortion specifically, particularly in the last about 4 or 5 months.
I'm Sabrina Hum, Associate Professor of Philosophy. I'm also the coordinator of the Women's Studies.
I'm Victoria Gordon, and I am here as a visiting scholar, the Coverdell Visiting Scholar, and I have about, 18 years experience teaching and another decade working in local government. And I think part of the reason that I feel I have something to say on this topic, even though we've now got the disclaimer that it reflects my knowledge, I did write a book on maternity leave policy and practice, and I include abortion statistics in there, and I was so maybe I shouldn't say excited, but I was happy, I'll try to think of a neutral word, to find that the dissent in the Dobbs case referenced my source that I use in my book on abortion statistics. So I felt very vindicated that I was on the right track with those heavy hitters in court.
Great. So we're gonna watch a quick little video that kind of like summarizes everything, gets everybody on the same page. It's pretty informational, and it's gonna tell us pretty much everything we're gonna talk about today. So that's that, and now we're gonna get into some questions that our group's gonna ask our panelists.
So how does your area of specialty inform your perspective on the recent Dobbs decision?
Somebody will already answer that.
I did kind of answer that just based on my research in maternity leave, so I'll leave it at that.
I think maybe I'm the only one who didn't answer it. It's possible. So I will just say, working in feminist philosophy, race theory, women's gender studies, we think a lot about the kinds of ideologies that are at stake in this kind of debate, and particularly about issues about women's health, issues about trans health, non-binary health that are all heavily impacted by a decision like this. Certainly a major area.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's mostly one of pure law, but at the same time, I'm also a political scientist, not just a law background. And so for me, it also kind of is something where we study institutions and the way, the process by which they make decisions, be they judicial, legislative, or whatever, state, federal. So I mean, again, I think some of the way that my job here is to educate students over those types of policies. And so this is very much on the nose, something that kind of hits on all of that at once.
And my perspective is legalistic, certainly having gone to law school and teaching business law, but I can't set aside the fact that I've been pregnant 6 times, 4 of which yielded in babies, and that I have a personal experience and perspective. So that taken together with my law training is what informs me.
All right, our next question is, how might the Dobbs decision affect students on our campus or the greater Milledgeville and or Baldwin County?
So, I think one thing as a mother and grandmother that I would say is that maybe it will lead to more direct conversations between young women and men and their families, their healthcare providers. Maybe you'll go looking for answers before you need to know the answer, much more than you would have before. You know, I have not had to worry about birth control for many years. And so, you know, but if I did, I would probably want to understand about, you know, the morning after pill and all kinds of different options. And, you know, what perspectives that, you know, my family has about this. I think it can be a conversation starter. It should not be a with the people that matter to you individually. But from that perspective, that's good.
I mean, I would say, thinking about the effects that this is going to have on the lives of the people in this room and other people in Milledgeville, we should be thinking about global effects, right? Thinking about, you know, birth control and choices around, you know, what one might do in the case of an unplanned pregnancy. But you should expect to see these effects spreading out through many areas of your life. So Georgia right now has a 6-week abortion now, right? 6 weeks. It's and that now. Pregnancies are dated from the last menstrual period. Now that you're not pregnant anymore, right? It's another 2. So that's 4 weeks from this, right? So this is one of the earlier, this is a relatively early gap. It's not the earliest that is going to affect decisions that students here are making around the kinds of birth control they're choosing, the kinds of sexual behaviors they're choosing. It is also going to affect the conversations probably that you can have with the doctors. So you may go to the doctor and ask, okay, what options do I have? And your doctor might not really be able to answer that question. The folks at Student Health Services might not be able to answer that question in this context. So when we talk about, you know, educating yourself, having these conversations, part of that means you might need to learn something about what the options are. What, you know, if you're someone who might choose to travel to another state, to ensure that you have choices about, you know, your reproductive future. You might need to think about what those states are and research the ways to get yourself there and the funds that can help you get there. Mail order options, things like that, because that's not going to be available, right? So this is affecting not only the individual choices, but the kinds of conversations you might be able to have with someone on campus or a health provider. Then you're going to find, and it mentions this, if you are choosing to become a parent in your life, this decision is going to continue to affect you, right? Because miscarriages that are incomplete and require abortion as a procedure for, you know, to maintain the fertility of the pregnant person, to maintain the health of the pregnant person, to allow a future pregnancy. That is a very common experience. I had that experience as well, right? So this is going to be a part of your family planning. You know, thinking about what choices you can make. When are you going to have children? I'll tell you, if you start having children at the age that I am right now, that's a pretty high risk, right? There's more risk to the pregnant person. There's more risk of, you know, a very severe vulnerability. So if you're in a place where you might not have a choice about how to move forward, that might affect timing, and how you're timing out and reproductive choices. It might constrain, you know, we don't know how these legal issues are going to develop, but certain people who are undergoing IVF and various assisted reproductive technologies often also are dependent on the possibility of issues for various reasons, and also freezing embryos, right? And what is the status of that frozen embryo now? I mean, that's going to be really big. So this is going to affect many decisions and conversations about our lives, not only around you know,
But I mean, when it comes to unplanned pregnancy, one thing I think that hasn't been, you know, the nail hasn't been hit on the head yet. You're very likely now to know over the course of your college career, somebody who might not be able to finish college because they get pregnant, can't terminate it, and that disrupts their life entirely. You may now know, guys, that you or a friend might also now have an obligation that is a lifetime, not 18 years, that you otherwise may not have had. And the choice is now no longer any of yours. It's now been made up for you. So I mean, there's going to be direct socioeconomic impacts from this, so where, you know, your decision, like I said, it's been made for you.
And you will know those people, right? I mean, a very important data point is that something like 30% of American women have an abortion with severely defined. So a lot of folks don't talk about it, and that's why we do. But it will be visible.
Yeah. And even the health effects, too, like you mentioned, like at certain times, like if you do have a miscarriage and you still need abortive drugs, like methotrexate, I think is one of them, it's very hard to even get that now. And to where if you don't get that treatment, you can develop sepsis, you could die. Ireland was notorious for having held back on abortion for a long time because of the Catholic cultural values. So they nationally watched a woman slowly die over several days because they would not help her. And now we're starting to see these stories happen. So again, you are very likely to see that happen here in the state of Georgia, here in Milledgeville, and potentially, you know, amongst our student body. It's more of a question of when, not if, because it's one of those things we know. Young people are going to have sex. They're not always going to be as careful with it as we always tell you to be. And so at the end of the day, it's just a mathematical certainty it's going to happen.
And I did want to add one thing. I did bring a handout about the legal status of abortion with Roe v. Wade overturned in the 50 states and what was expected. And I wanted to read to you, this is what I had to do last week. I voted absentee ballot. I live in Kentucky, and here's the question I had to answer. Constitutional Amendment number 2. Are you in favor of amending the Constitution of Kentucky by creating a new section of the Constitution to be numbered section 26A to state as follows? To protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion, ? Yes or no? So even if you're past the age of having a baby, you still may be presented with voting on issues in your respective states. Not all of you may live in Georgia, you may vote somewhere else. So that's an issue too, and I'll leave you to you all with.
Now we talked about how it's not an issue of whether we're one.
Yeah.
Right, that is, we're located in Georgia, right? We had a question about what about the locale here in the village, right? Well, this is not a region that has great health outcomes. Right? Georgia, the United States compared to other developed countries has very poor maternal and fetal mortality rates. Women and babies are more likely to die in this country than others, and more likely to die in Georgia and in this region than in other regions of the country. That has to do with poverty, it has to do with stress and racism, and it has to do with lack of access to health. The state does not do a good job of making healthcare accessible to people compared to some other states. So the majority of counties in Georgia don't have either an obstetrician or a pediatrician. Right, so think about being in that county, maybe not having access to transportation, trying to keep yourself healthy and to have a healthy pregnancy. So when we talk about how this is going to impact us, I mean, there's us on the campus, right? I think most people on this campus have access to transportation, right? And there is a hospital here and medical care. When we look at this region and how this is going to impact women who don't have educational privilege, women who don't have access to healthcare, Black women in this country, this region have poor health outcomes because of lack of access in general. There's us, and then there's the region, right, which is an impoverished region.
Okay, since this decision overturns a 50-year judicial precedent, how will this affect the upcoming term for the Supreme Court and its movement?
I'll jump straight on that one. Yeah, I mean, honestly, in terms of like asking how is it going to affect, I think, hold on to your butts. I think they're going to keep coming. Like if right off the bat, right, they get their 6-member majority and they come out with this. There's not much that's bigger part of the culture wars than abortion. And so when they're willing to come out term 1 and issue this big of a decision, they are going to just keep rocking. It's not going to stop. And as for the newest member, you know, in a way, I feel bad for her because she's going to be thrown into the minority of the court's decision probably for the next several to maybe even decade, several years to a decade, to where her decisions are just going to be largely complaining about and saying, here's what we should have done instead of here's what we actually can do. So her voice is largely going to be screaming into the void, even though she's sitting on one of the seats of power that, you know, make up one of our three branches of government.
I was just gonna say, despite any assurances, you know, from reading the entire majority and dissenting opinion that we won't see other things eroded, I don't believe that that's true at all. So we have a lot of issues where, you know, people, it really, and it doesn't matter where you are on how you view, for example, same-sex marriage or, you know, one of the other ones, you know, interracial marriage, you know, all of these things, no matter where you are on whatever that is. There's complications at every angle. There's complications about, you know, making decisions for people at the end of their life. I know you all are at the beginning, but there are many things that happen only in a marriage, if you will, in terms of how people are treated as they get to the end of their life and you know, what happens. And, you know, whether that's pension or medical things or whatever. And if those things are, you know, just start falling away, you know, it really, a lot of complication, not just easy on any form.
People one thing we know really clearly is that they're not going to be bound by precedent, right? I mean, that's that was a question. So who knows what could come out?
You might be just very decisive in what that actually means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it actually, so when you go to, if you go to law school, you're a law school who is up there. They almost, it's a strong socialization. I mean, Jan could absolutely speak to this as well. I mean, they really drive home this idea that, oh, whatever's been decided, that's, we've got to follow precedent. Even though we know there are times when we've had a precedent that's really bad, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, right? So we can all say that was clearly bad. This is though the first time we've seen precedent being overturned where a right was taken away. That's never happened. It's always been in a direction of increased liberty, never one where something was pulled back, which then I think again signals some of the very recent wins in the culture war. So like Onderville versus Hodges, gay marriage. It's not a very old precedent. It's only 5-6 years old. Lawrence versus Texas, that was in the early 2000s, which is literally the right of sexual privacy, the right to have sexual intercourse with another person of the same sex was not something that was guaranteed in a lot, particularly in southern states, until what, about 2003. It seems unthinkable when you read the logic of this and you see that they say, oh, well, precedent matters, and then you read the logic of them overturning Roe. It seems extraordinarily difficult to see how could you square this decision in Dobbs with one that would then later uphold the rights of gay marriage or sexual privacy. It just, I don't see a way that it's credible in the least.
And there are for sure people who are going to try to push this.
Oh, they're promising now. Yeah, I mean, the Attorney General of Texas has said like we're coming after Lawrence v. Texas, because that's where that was where it had originally started. So it looks pretty clear they're looking to expand their victory set in the next several years.
That was definitely like one of the next questions we were gonna ask was, no, it's fine, y'all are ahead of us, but it was like, if they can do this, like, if we're looking at precedent like that, like with same-sex marriage or even interracial marriage that have been, you know, same-sex marriage is only 5-6 years old, like interracial marriage has been legal for a really long time. If they can do this, you know, it's kind of like, what's next? Like, is that a possibility? We don't really know, but I mean, you know, maybe for sure. Yeah.
I do think that when we look at this at this point, you know, we can ask what the Supreme Court will do next and, you know, what they might do in terms of abortion rights in the future. This is not entirely up to them, right? I mean, right now, the structure of things was that abortion rights rested on Roe v. Wade, and there was no national legislation or anything like that to that effect. I mean, what we see, whether in terms of, you know, how the winds blow on the Supreme Court, and also, you know, what happens legislatively. I mean, this is something that can be affected by a voting, right? So to some extent, these are questions that have now been pushed to the voters on a state by state basis and on a national basis. I mean, folks want to change this on a national level. Voters don't get to change the Supreme Court in a direct way, but they can speak to these laws. It's also the question for citizens. I mean, there's the law on the books, and then there's what people do. There are networks of folks mobilizing to find, you know, to skirt or outright violate this law, right? So one of the questions is, you know, does the law bind people? Do people follow it, or do they take the attendant risks to not follow the law? I mean, it doesn't map to their consciences. So it's not just a story about the Supreme Court. There are a lot of individual actions.
And if anything, I think the Supreme Court's probably sidelined themselves from the abortion decision for the next several years, if not probably a decade or more. Because it's a very slow to change institution, if for no other reason. The appointment is effectively for life. Right? Once you're on it, you're there until you either decide you don't want to do it anymore or you die. And so because of that, the turnover rate's so slow. And when you look at 3 of the new members who have been appointed, 3 of the 4 newest members for conservatives, the people who are most likely to get replaced in the coming, 5-6 years are liberal justices, likely to be getting replaced either with liberal justices or, again, depending on how the elections go, could be even more conservative, very conceivably. So I really don't think, if you're looking at like where the victories could potentially come next, it's not going to be one, I think, from the court on abortion specifically. It's going to be at the state level and maybe potentially at the federal level if we get some federal legislation. But it's mostly going to be in the state houses. The local elections that nobody ever even can remember who they voted for or who represents you, that's got a lot more importance now.
And that goes both ways, right? Sometimes the state elections are going in the direction of stricter abortion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe she can't hear. Could you repeat the question louder?
Yeah,
The next one.
yeah.
Okay. So what can students do to learn more or inform themselves about the potential impacts of such long decisions and influence by?
I just want to give her a chance to chime in if she wants to.
Are you there?
Sure, yes. Can I?
Yeah.
Nicholas, can you give me a thumbs up if the audio is decent? Okay. All right. So I believe the question was, how can students better inform themselves? Is that about right? All right. So while I was hearing the conversation earlier, and granted, I can hear Nicholas a lot better than I can Sabrina and Victoria, I apologize. The one thing that I felt was maybe a little bit before we kind of talk about how you guys can inform yourselves better is we talked about federally Dobbs, but we didn't specifically talk about House Bill 481 specifically. And I just wanted to touch on that really quickly because I wouldn't want you to leave this conversation without knowing exactly what is in this law. So for instance, it defines a natural person as any unborn child at any state of development carried in the womb. And so I don't know if you guys heard about this. So another impact is that now you can get a tax deduction in the state of Georgia for $3,000 for being pregnant. So for instance, if you get pregnant and you miscarry, then you can still claim a $3,000 deduction because a natural born person is a dependent under Georgia law, which is maybe, I don't know how people view that, but it just seems surprising that that would be a result. Another, Nicholas, thumbs up if you can still hear me. Thank you. Also, another provision of this law says that abortion does not include termination of ectopic pregnancy or removal of remnants of miscarriage or stillbirth that occur naturally. So there's a specific provision that carves out an exception for ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages and stillbirth. So if you do have one of those, your doctor can make the decision to do a D&C or D&E, those procedures, in order to remove the remnants of that conception. There are also 3 other exceptions in House Bill 481. One allows an abortion to avert the death of a pregnant person or avert serious risk of substantial or irreversible physical impairment of major bodily function. So for instance, if a patient's water breaks pre-viability and failure to perform an abortion will result in sepsis, then an abortion would be necessary to save the life of the pregnant person. So it looks like there was some efforts in Georgia to try to address some of the major concerns, but then there's questions about doctors and at what point is their decision a best medical judgment and when is it going too far? So there's sort of a risk for doctors too. A second exception is when pregnancy is medically futile, such as chromosomal anomalies that is incompatible with sustaining life. And then the third exception is in the event of rape or incest, but everyone should know that that is still limited to 20 weeks and it requires a police report. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was informed on all the provisions of House Bill 481.
So that was all the questions that we had. We kind of wanted to turn it over to like everyone else in the room. And if y'all had any questions you wanted to ask us or our panelists, we're gonna kind of just like open to that. So feel free to ask any questions they want to ask.
Could the rest of you expand on that last question about the
Yeah,
Georgia College community? Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, what can students do to learn more or inform themselves about the potential impact of such a monumental decision in an informative life?
I mean, if nothing else too, you've got to just, again, like I was saying, start looking at the races that you've never paid attention to. You've got to start looking at the people who are looking, you know, to run for state senate and state house. Because there's real power in those places, and we often don't know them. So go and look for like little, because nobody's got really the time or the inclination to work on every seat and everything. There's like cheat sheets, League of Women Voters, right? Comes out, they're neutral. They're just saying, like, here's basically a report on these individuals, quick, easy to read, easy to digest for. They can let you know based on your values who you should go for. So look for things like that. You know, there's a lot of places that have done the hard work for you. So that way you can go exercise your vote in a way that helps shift policy in the direction you want.
Informed your research, I really encourage everybody to read the opinions. It's a lot, but you really need to see the rationale, so you have a good understanding of that. I also went back and read the confirmation hearing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg this week, which is, I think, 600 and some pages. And a lot of what they asked her about was her position on Roe v. Wade and other related items. And, you know, she can really tell it like it is. In no uncertain terms. And I would say just, you know, look to trusted sources, look to see positions of those that you trust, understand what you're voting for when you're voting. I had no idea what I was voting for until I had to do my research when, you know, voting absentee, you know, I had to have I had to call and get the ballot mailed to my house. My husband had to physically drive it to me because I don't have a campus mailing address living where I live. And then I had to do it, go to the post office and send it back and do my research before I did all of my voting, you know, and it's complicated. And I have the Dish app, so I can see all of the local commercials from home to see what people are saying, you know, about why to vote yes or why to vote no on this particular amendment. And still it's complicated, you know. So you have to do your homework.
Continue doing your research. I would also suggest, you know, finding those trusted sources for health information. Like I said, you will not always be able to easily access that. You know, information about the choices that you might make. So be aware of where you get that information. If you or someone that you care about needs it, I also would suggest to anyone who, whether you're confident in your opinion or you're somebody who's curious about this and wondering, you can, and which is a totally incredible place to be. You know, again, educate yourself, and I really suggest, listen to people's stories. There are websites out there where folks tell their stories, in great detail, and really open their hearts to, and open up the maybe stigmatized chapter of their life, and get that off their chest so that folks can have a full understanding of it. There's a really wide range of experiences, that go into decisions about abortion and childbearing. And that's a good place to start when you're figuring out how you feel about this or getting there.
In the end too, you're surrounded by a bunch of nerds, professors, right? We know our stuff. Like we got so nerded out that most of us became a doctor in the field of what now we do. Like that, it's an incredible resource. Don't feel like you even need, like when we have office hours, we don't care who really shows up. Sometimes we're just happy somebody came to talk to us. We're in there alone. It's a very atomistic existence often, where we're kind of on our own. Just come out and talk, and we'll be happy to give you any sort of information that you might.
Awesome. And, I think with any difficult life decision, talking about things before they're real and in front of you are so much better talking in a safe and trusted environment than it is when you are in it. And whether that's your peers, your professors, your clergy, your doctor, whoever it is, figuring these things out for yourself before you're in that situation can really help.
So does anybody have any questions? Yes.
And if you feel strongly, exercise your right to vote. Somewhere along the way, you're going to be able to vote on this. Wherever your position is, exercise your right to vote.
I have a question related to, you said that you looked up Ruth Bader Ginsburg's confirmation materials.
Hearing.
Her hearing.
Yeah.
What do you all make of this like funny play of logic that seems to be in bad faith, where the conservative justices used her quote from her to kind of, put forth their opinions? Like, what do you? And I feel like it's happening in the political ecosystem in general.
I see all of it because, so there's some discussion in her questions about this issue of right to privacy versus the equality. And I quote, "But you asked me about my thinking on equal protection versus individual autonomy. My answer is that both are implicated. The decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. It is a decision she must make for herself. When government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a fully adult human responsible for her own choices." That was just in one response. So it's 600 plus pages too, but it gets to that. From the other stuff that I read from her was that she did not see them being either or, that she saw them intertwined.
Yeah.
The right to privacy and the whole issue of equal protection.
Yeah, if anything, you can just tell from her, she would have written it a little differently. Like if she was the one writing Roe, she had a different legal theory. She might have been a concurring opinion instead of the majority opinion, to where it's basically like, I like the result we got to with Roe. I got slightly different reasoning for getting there. And so it's not really this thing that undermines the results of Roe, as if it's often cast as by people who are trying to utilize their words in that way. It's kind of an abuse of her words.
Right, and you are absolutely a constitutional expert here, but another thing that she was asked about was the Air Force case of Captain Strzok. Are you familiar with that? Where basically the Air Force was telling this woman, if you are pregnant, you have to leave service. And she wanted to have the baby. So this is like the opposite of requiring an abortion. And so anyway, there's a whole discussion in this, but in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's point, she says that her equality, this woman's equality right, her right to decide for herself whether she was going to be burying a child, and her religious beliefs were all tied up in this particular case. And it was the opposite of abortion, but it still applied. And I thought that was also a really interesting way to look at it and read her words.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't really hear her. What was the like law kind of 401? What was that? Like the exceptions to abortion? Is that like for now?
Right. Yeah, that's the current law applicable today.
Just the number.
That's still from rating.
481.
480.
So yeah, like one of the big exceptions to rape incidents, but we also have to keep in mind, it's probably one of the least reported crimes. And so if nothing else, it elevates the importance of that now. So we're, stepping out, speaking out, it's become a lot more important because you may need that 20 weeks down the line.
Do you have any more questions? Okay, well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you everybody for coming. But yeah.
Thank you. Pretty sure they were.